Thank you for coming. Today, we're going to be talking about the DAT and how I scored in the 99th percentile and how you can too. This information I'm about to share is more strictly reserved for the students that I personally tutor and personally coach. So I'm glad that there's not too many people here, because this information is very valuable. But eventually I want as many people to get this information as possible. I'll post it on YouTube for everybody, because when I was studying for the DAT, and I also studied for the MCAT, and I didn't do so well on that, I wish I had this information. I wish someone had told me what I learned, rather than kind of figuring out for myself and kind of receiving cookie cutter advice from people that meant well, but hadn't really put a lot of thought into what it takes to score well on a standardized test like the MCAT or the DAT. So I've made plenty of mistakes. And I've learned from those mistakes, and I hope you guys can learn from my mistakes. So if you're feeling anxious or nervous about taking the DAT, hopefully after hearing me today, you guys will get a little bit more confidence, and maybe things will click in your head. So if you're feeling frustrated and you're studying for the DAT and you're thinking, I can't retain this information, there's just too much information. It's not clicking, it's not sticking. What's going on? I don't feel motivated. There's no way that I can get this information in my head. So then I've experienced that too. I've totally experienced that. And it's because the way you're approaching the test is different. This is a standardized test that is multiple choice. So if you're studying for this exam like you did with all of your previous classes in university, you're thinking about it wrong. All right. And that's not any fault of your own. It's, that's the way we've been trained to study for exams in university. And what did you write about? Just the AD-DAT. I didn't take the Canadian one, if that's what CADAT means. Someone's asking me. But the tips I'm going to give to you are not specific to the DAT or specific to the MCAT. They're specific to any standardized test or any test in general. You have to know your goal. You have to know what you're studying for first. This is not a trivia exam that you're studying for. This is a standardized test with multiple choices. And it's a competition too. You have to remember that. There's other students that are trying to score better than you. For a lot of people, that may give them a lot of pressure, and they don't like thinking about it that way. But for some of us, it actually motivates you. But if it makes you feel anxious to think that other people are competing against you, then don't think about that, right? So everything has to be personalized and catered to who you are and your study style. And that's where I come in as a coach. I think a lot of advice that people give when it comes to personal statements or studying for exams or even college tips are generic, too generic. And they don't give you the space to really think about it yourself. They just say, here it is, follow it as it is, and good luck. When it should be, okay, what questions are you asking yourself? How do you study? Or have you done a self-audit of your study habits, your focus ability, your lifestyle, whether you have different obligations? What are you willing to sacrifice when studying for a big exam? Why do you want to go to dental school? Why do you want to go to medical school? These are all questions that you have to ask yourself and get straight and get aligned in your mind when you're studying for something as important as the DAT or the MCAT, because you don't want to have to choke or feel some kind of cognitive dissonance when you're studying for the exam, because that will lead to choking on the exam and performing not to your very best abilities. So thank you everybody for coming. I'm glad that everyone is here. let me reiterate one more time that this information that I'm about to give you is what I'm saying is this information is mostly reserved for the students that I coach and I tutor. So I'm making the decision to give it to everybody. So that's why I haven't been pushing and advertising this workshop as hard as the other two. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started on this. Okay. So I'm Nathan. I scored in the 99th percentile on the DAT. I don't know if you know that. I mentioned it like 100 times. And I graduated from UC San Diego in 2018. Before that, I went to community college for 3 years. And when I graduated from UC San Diego, I studied for the MCAT and I tried to apply for medical school. I made all the mistakes humanly possible. And I thought about, I approached the MCAT in the completely wrong way. I was trying to memorize information. I was doing Anki flashcards, reading textbooks, watching YouTube videos, memorizing mechanisms when that really wasn't the correct method. So then when I studied for the DAT, I still made mistakes for a whole month. And I took 4 months to study for the exam. And I could have done it in 3 had I known what I know now. And the information I want to give you, my goal today is to give you as much information as you can to start studying for the DAT effectively. And a lot of students are confused. A lot of students are lost. And I was too. And I wish I had this information when I was in your position. So let's start with tip number 1. So tip number 1, a lot of students ask me, when should they start taking practice tests? And to that, I would say, take a practice test, even if you don't feel ready. Take a full-length practice test or start doing practice problems. It doesn't really matter because a lot of students are scared of the results that they're going to get on the practice test. And, it's going to sting when you get that number to say, oh my God, I knew I was dumb. But that you shouldn't feel that way because obviously you're going to score low. You've never taken this test before. You've never done this before. It's something completely new. So kind of don't put so much pressure on yourself or have those expectations on yourself on very early on. And don't be afraid of the score because these practice tests are in the beginning are not a diagnostic tool. They are a tool to improve your performance. So you want to focus on getting comfortable with the exam and understanding the pacing and the timing of the exam. So let me reiterate that. So do practice exams, not with the goal of which number I'm going to get, what's going to be my score, what's my baseline. Everyone's baseline is basically 0 because you've never taken this test yet. So it's going to vary a little bit, but for the most part, you're not going to get a very high score, even if you're good at biology, even if you're good at chemistry, even if you're good at organic chemistry, because you don't understand the pacing, you don't understand the timing, and you don't understand the wording of the test. So take those full-length exams so you understand that and you get comfortable with the exam so that when it comes test time, you're used to the pressure and you don't choke and you don't panic. And this happens to top performers, top athletes, top musicians, top artists. They all have dealt with choking and cracking under pressure. And that's what you want to avoid. You want to be so comfortable with the exam that it becomes unconscious to you. You're just like doing the exam. It's just another day on the job. And I'm probably, I'll talk about test anxiety right now. I said I was going to do another workshop on that, but let's talk about that right now. That's a common question I get from a lot of students. And it's a really big sticking point for students. It's because the anxiety comes from the uncertainty of, oh, what if they give me different questions on the exam than what I'm practicing for? I'm practicing for the wrong thing. What if I choke on the exam? So those are the things that you want to address. So if you think that you don't understand the pacing of the exam, do more practice problems. The more you do more practice problems, the more you do more practice tests, hopefully your anxiety will quell. Okay. Another thing is, and everything that I suggest is something that I've done as well. So you have to meditate before the exam and in the middle of the exam. So that way your mind is clear and you're not overthinking things when you take the exam and when you study. So the DAT is like 2-hour chunks. You take the first 3 sections and you have a 30-minute break. When I took the exam, I did those, I meditated beforehand, close my eyes, breathe a little bit, whatever, however you want to meditate. And then I took the first 2 hours of the exam. And then after that, there's a 30-minute break. I ate a little snack and I just closed my eyes and I just breathe. Just, meditate however you want it. And then by the time I got to the second section, I was focused and I wasn't choking because it was something I was used to. So that's how you want to be too. And another reason why students want avoid taking practice exams is because they're scared of memorizing the answers to the exam, and therefore they feel like they're not truly testing their abilities. So that is kind of irrational fear because most of us don't have photographic memory. So it's going to be very hard to memorize all of the answers on the exam. And so even if you do happen to memorize all the answers on that practice exam, that's okay, as long as you go back and review those questions and understand why you got those questions right or why you got those questions wrong. That is really where the learning starts. And even if you get questions wrong and you memorize, like, let's say you memorize 90% of the questions and you understand why you got 90% of the questions right. So then that 10%, you'll be able to pinpoint your weaknesses. Even though you memorize the answers of the test, I still got this question wrong. Why did I get this question wrong? They must have tricked me somehow, because most questions, you can deduce it down to 1 or 2 answers. And at that point, you have to, it's 50-50 almost. So you have to use your judgment and you have to be quick and you have to develop that decision-making judgment, because it's not about memorizing information. When they're trying to trick you with 2 answers, it doesn't matter what you memorize. You have to make a quick like a quick decision about one of those 2 answers, and you don't have much time to think about it. It's your unconscious, your judgment that you've developed practicing for the exam, that you'll be able to pick the right answer when it matters the most. Yeah, so Anki, the reason why I don't really recommend Anki very much, I know Anki is like such a big deal. All the medical students rave about Anki, Anki this, Anki that, Anki whatever. That's great when you're studying for exams in a university where you do have to memorize everything because you don't know what they're going to throw at you. On the DAT, it's a multiple choice exam. So when you're doing practice problems or flashcards and there's not multiple choice and you have to draw from your knowledge bank, you're not utilizing you're not being tested on your judgment. You're being tested on your recall. And your judgment is tested when they give you 1 or 2 or 3 similar answers. And you're reading the question and say, dang, maybe one of these 3 answers, okay, it's one of these 2, and you pick one. And if you've been doing Anki the whole time, there's no way that you can improve on your judgment. Does that make sense? So I do recommend saving 2 to 3 fresh tests. So for the last week of your study schedule, so that way those are real diagnostic tools, because at the end you want to know where you sit so that way you can improve or maybe push your test date back so you can get better. But I also encourage you, redo those practice exams, even the ones that you've memorized. The more practice exams you're exposed to, the more, the better your judgment. Okay. Oh yeah, here's something I want to mention. When students tell me that they're saving their practice tests for later, that's like asking Michael Phelps, hey, why are you doing so many push-ups and pull-ups? Why aren't you swimming? And he says, I'm saving swimming for later. I'm saving swimming for later. I don't want to practice. I don't want to work on that right now. And that's like you guys taking copious amounts of notes and reading textbooks and doing Ankis. And I ask students, hey, how many practice exams have you done? What are your scores? And they say, oh, I'm saving that for later. I'm not ready yet. Of course you're not ready. That's the point. You need to do practice tests so you are ready, so you're comfortable with the exam. Test taking skills are very important on the DAT. Okay, next thing. If you're not an expert in biology, OChem, or chemistry, don't try to become one. Become an expert on the DAT. So you see a theme that I'm rolling with here. Information retention is is a big sticking point for a lot of students. This is not a trivia contest. You have to sharpen your judgment, and don't take notes. Just expose yourself to as many practice problems as you can. So let me give you an example. Let's say there's a question about the Krebs cycle, and they're asking you about the location of the Krebs cycle and where it occurs in the cell. And there's two options. There's cytosol and mitochondrial matrix. Okay, and you choose wrong. You say cytosol, and you say, okay, well, and then now you need to digest that whole question, digest the question as a whole. So now you would ask yourself, okay, well, if I know that Krebs cycle occurs in the mitochondrial matrix, because that's the right answer, then what does occur in the cytosol? So I would write on a piece of paper what occurs in the cytosol, and I would look that up, and it would be glycolysis. Oh, that's great. Well, then what other reactions occur? Where does beta oxidation occur? And you would look that up. Okay, beta oxidation occurs in the mitochondria. So now you know that there's a common theme. They're going to ask about locations of different reactions, as opposed to, let's say you memorize all the Krebs cycle and you memorize all the structures of metabolites. You tried to study that, but when it comes time where you answer the question, you forget that one little piece of the location of the Krebs cycle, and you get that question wrong. That would have been you would have been wasting time trying to retain information and understanding the structure of the metabolite, rather than exposing yourself to so many practice problems that you know which questions that they're going to expect, and then you learn from there, right? So you know what they're going to expect, and you learn the key informations about the Krebs cycle or glycolysis, which is location, is very high yield. And you should ask questions about the questions. Like I said, where is this? What is this? Don't just pick the question and move on. You have to dive deep into the concept. And I do recommend you do have to understand concepts in full. That is very important. But always have a question in mind that you're trying to answer. Like, you don't know what you don't know, as in your knowledge bank. Let's say you're trying to increase your knowledge bank, but then you can come across something called information overload, where you're just, building up your knowledge for no reason. And you don't know which questions you're asking yourself. You don't know why you're studying this knowledge bank. You say, I may need it later. Oh, do I need to memorize this? I don't know. I'll just memorize it anyway. That's waste of time and waste of your resources, rather than say, okay, I know that they're going to ask location, so I'm going to drill that. They might ask this. Okay, so I'm going to drill that. They're not going to ask about the structure, so I'm going to completely ignore that. They're not going to ask about the order of the different reactions, so I'm not going to worry about that. Oh, they do ask about ATP, NAD, H. Oh, so I'm going to really understand that. And then understanding how they connect with each other, glycolysis, Krebs cycle, electron transport chain. Yes, those are very important concepts. Do you see? I'm not an expert in biology. I'm not an expert in OChem. I actually got a C in OChem, but I do know how to take the DAT because I've developed that judgment and the way to kind of digest problems. And if you've been studying a different way the whole time, then it's going to be kind of difficult to get out of that pattern. Let's say, for example, you've been, a student once told me that, oh, I'm not good at OChem. I memorize all the reactions, and when it comes to the final, I always do poorly, and I never get the answers right. Electron pushing is so difficult for me, and memorizing all these reactions is so difficult for me when it comes to organic chemistry. And I say, what? I had that same problem too. I'm not good at electron pushing. I'm not good at organic chemistry. But the way you study for organic chemistry on the DAT is different than the way you study for organic chemistry in university. Because in university, they give you a blank sheet of paper and they say, write out this reaction in full. On the DAT, you never get any questions like that. You get multiple choice questions. So that if you're doing a Markovnikov, they give you 2 answer choices and you got to pick one. You don't have to write out the whole structure because they write it for you. So why are you wasting your time trying to write out each structure and electron pushing when that's not going to be tested? That's information overload. You're studying for the wrong thing. So remember your focus. Always study with multiple choice in mind, and you'll get way better results. Um, let's see. I think that's a good foundation for a lot of you right now. So let's talk about Q&A. If you guys have any questions for me, I know that was a lot to digest. It'll take practice to start thinking about these questions in a different way. So go ahead and share your questions down in the chat and let me know what you guys have issues with. What are your sticking points? If you guys have any. Yeah, so the biology notes, it is so overwhelming. And they say breadth over depth. That's true. That's true. But I would say focus on increasing your judgment, your quick decision-making judgment. That is the best thing that you can do because you can't memorize everything. It is overwhelming. So you can have the notes, like the textbook or the notes in like a different slide or different window. And when you're doing the problems and you get them wrong, you refer to the exam. I mean, you refer to the textbook and you have a question in mind. You know what you're looking for. You have those questions rather than just meandering around and trying to map out the whole forest of information. There's a whole forest of information that you need to know. But then if you whittled it down to say, okay, I need to know about this specific shrub. I need to find these specific trees, the sequoia tree, or this cherry bush. Then you don't have to worry about the little weeds that's in the way because you're focusing on what you need to look for. Do you recommend sharing the DAT? Yeah, share the subscription with others because you not only can collaborate with them, save you a little bit of money. And a lot of students ask me if I recommend DAT Destroyer. I do recommend DAT Destroyer. Math Destroyer, I didn't use it that much, but if it's helpful to you, that's great. Because both Math Destroyer and DAT Destroyer, the questions are incredibly difficult, like unreasonably difficult, but that's a good thing. Even towards the end of my studying, I only got like 1/3 of the answers right on DAT Destroyer. I got 2/3 of the answers wrong. So I was like, oh my God, there's no way I'm going to do well on this exam if I'm only getting 1/3 of the answers wrong. Even when I memorized the answers, I still didn't understand it. But the point of doing DAT Destroyer is to test your resilience, test your judgment and pressure your decision-making, pressure your uncertainty. If you're uncertain and you keep second guessing yourself, multiple choice, oh, is it left? Is it right? Is it left? Is it right? And you waste 5 minutes on one question, that's going to be detrimental to you. So really focus on putting the pressure on and understanding that there has to be a little bit of uncertainty and you have to make that decision fast. So yeah, I think DAT Destroyer is absolutely great for that because it gave me a headache. I was so frustrated with it because I was getting 2/3 of the answers wrong, and it was tough, but it worked out for the best. Practice exams on the DAT bootcamp are sufficient. Yes, they are sufficient, but don't rely on them solely. You redo those practice exams. There's DAT bootcamp notes. Yes. Which one do you use? Okay, so you're asking the wrong question. See, this is a type of situation where students ask the wrong questions. Like, what notes do you use? Do you use this note, or that note? Do you rub your belly or do you pat your head? Those are irrelevant questions. It doesn't matter what resource you use as long as you find the answer and you have good practice problems. That is a foundation. Good practice problems that you can, with multiple choice, that you can practice on, and you just use Google. Just use Google. So I would Google, where is the cytosol? I don't have to refer to a specific textbook. As long as the information gets in my head, I'll use YouTube videos. I'll use Google images. I'll use the explanations in the DAT bootcamp. I'll do the DAT Destroyer guy. That guy is, he's very energetic and he gives you good tips and tricks. But the goal is to find the right answer, not which notes, this notes, or that notes. When do you recommend taking the DAT? When you feel, when you've had enough time to study, when you feel comfortable with the exam. Doesn't matter how late in your college career it takes. That's a different question. It depends on your timeline and when you want to get into dental school, right? So if your goal is to get into the top, you have to understand your goal. If your goal is to just get into dental school, maybe the timing of it is not so important and you want to, right out of undergrad, you want to get into dental school, then that's great. But let's say you want to take a gap year. So your strategy would be a little different, right? So that's why I try and avoid cookie cutter answers, because everybody's situation is different. And when I coach a student, I approach their situation and their extracurriculars and their life experiences and their focus bandwidth differently. For a lot of students, they can't focus for 2 hours at a time, and that's something that we need to work on. And okay, so take it easy. Which section do you like studying the most? Do you like biology? Do you like chemistry? Do you like OChem? Almost nobody likes studying OChem first, but some students say, I like reading comprehension. Okay, so let's make it really easy. And you're going to first start with reading comprehension, and we'll do that for a whole week. And then, it's a little bit difficult, but I'm comfortable and I'm getting comfortable with it. And it's fun. It's not really fun, but it's not, you want to slam your head against the wall, because if you get so frustrated that you kind of quit, then it's not useful. That's why I never recommend doing DAT Destroyer first. That is not your first source of study material, because it's just too difficult. Biology section have videos now, so it's not that bad now. Yeah, so I think the videos are great. If you're looking for a specific answer, ask yourself a question, then watch the videos and look for an answer. But most of the time, I can just consult Google and get the answers in 15 seconds rather than having to watch the whole video of the homie explaining the whole mechanism, and then I have to do 2 times speed and I have to like rewind it. Wait, what did he say? I didn't really quite get that. What is he saying? Yeah, so you just waste the whole time trying to watch the whole video. So that's probably the last resort. For me, my priority list of resources is number 1, Google. Number 2 is the explanation that they give. Number 3 is, like, let's say an outside textbook or a notes, like note bank, like DAT Destroyer note bank or whatever note bank that you use, textbook. And the last one would be the videos for me personally, because I can find YouTube videos that explain it in a different way that I understand. For me, some videos didn't click with me and some videos did click with me. So it really depends on how you learn. PAT section tips. Yeah, that section is very strategy heavy. Okay, so you have to skip to the angle ranking section. Okay, and when just 50-50 chance, quick decision, don't look back. And angle ranking, I never got more than 50-50 for all angle ranking, right? So because it's so difficult to determine like 2 degrees between different angles, that's very difficult. And the hole punching section is also a section where you can use a technique, right? So it's like this hole punching technique. So you kind of just like draw a grid. So in between in the 30-minute break that you have, I would draw 15 grids on my little scratch paper, 15 grids like that. And then when it comes to time where I get to that hole punching section, you use a technique, bang, 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 fold it, diagonals, and everything is mirror images of each other. So once you get that pattern, everything's about pattern. This whole test is about pattern. A lot of standardized tests, it's just all pattern recognition. So you just do that. And there's a technique that, I go over with my students that you can learn too. Any other questions? Yeah, strategies for front, top end. It's hard to find practice tests for that section. I think they have good practice questions on DAT bootcamp, they do have good resources in that. Strategies. Yeah, just expose yourself to as many practice problems as you can. It's like shooting a free throw. Just keep practicing it. And, your brain will naturally adapt, because when you get the right answer, it'll be good. And you'll remember that. When you get the wrong answer, you won't like that. So you just expose yourself to the person that does 1,000, a 10,000 PAT practice problems that are, actually close to what's going to be on the exam, is much more prepared than a person trying to use little tips and tricks and strategies and trying to game the system. If you just do enough practice problems, just repetition, you're so comfortable with the exam that it's just unconscious. You just wake up, you just do the exam. Okay, just another day, bang, 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 bang. So when it comes test time, okay, you wake up, you drive to the place, you do the exam, no big deal. What was your favorite reading method that worked for you? Okay, yeah, so the DAT bootcamp have different reading techniques. I've heard, so this is where people start to choke. I've heard situations where, oh, I came in and I had a strategy and I threw that strategy out the window. And for some student, it worked, right? Because the pressure of the exam was different than the pressure of the practice exams, and they were able to excel and exceed their expectations in that situation of pressure. But the other sections, they didn't do so well. So whichever method you practice with is a method that you want to use on the exam. So just keep practicing it until it becomes unconscious. So when you start choking, you want to rely on your instincts, right? And you can't think about it too much because you don't have enough time. Does that make sense? What was your favorite? Yeah. So everything you have to kind of figure out yourself. Every section is a little bit different, but for the most part, it's all about testing your judgment. Increase your judgment. Multiple choice. Make sure you right click and eliminate multiple choices. That's a little tip. And highlight important words, highlight important phrases, and don't be afraid to skip questions, especially in the biology section, where a lot of those can be 50-50 toss-ups, right? But when it comes to the general chemistry section, when it's numbers, it's difficult to decipher between one or two answers. You have to do the calculation and get one answer. But in the biology, it's one or two. So you can mark that and then go back to it later when you're done with the other section, and then you go back to the biology section and you just do 50-50-50-50. And then you answer all the questions, right? So that's another test taking technique. What do you recommend doing for the last 2 to 3 days before exam? Study. When I don't like when people say, oh, just take it easy the day before your exam. Just relax, go to Disneyland, get a massage, just like go loco. That is not something I recommend. One of my friends, he took that advice. He was taking the MCAT. And a lot of people so that's the generic cookie cutter advice that I don't like either. And he took that advice and he had to retake the MCAT, and he barely even studied any differently. It's just because his brain was so used to the pattern of studying every single day that when it came to those last 2 days and he wasn't studying, his instincts were telling him there's something wrong. Something's not adding up. So when it came to test time, he was too anxious. And that happens all the time where people can't sleep the night before the exam. And that's because their mind is racing. They don't have their mental game on point. Their instincts are telling them, you're not ready for this. You need to, get your mind right. And that comes with practice, meditating. And, this is a book that it's called With Winning in Mind. It's a book that it's mandatory. If you're working with me, if you're one of my students and I'm coaching you and tutoring you, it's one of the books that is mandatory to read, because it was the #1 book. It's the book that actually allowed me to get the score that I got, because this book is about an Olympic rifle shooter, and he trained his entire life from up until when it's called With Winning in Mind. Go to my YouTube channel and click the affiliate link and buy it there if you're going to buy it. Or I can just send you the PDF if you send me your email. If you fill out the Google form right here, I'll send you the PDF. All right. I reserve this for my students, but because there's not many people in this Zoom call right now, I'll give it to you. So go ahead and put your email in the Google Docs, this Google form, and I'll send it to you. Yeah, so this book is about an Olympic rifle shooter, and he trained his whole life when he was from when he was a kid to get the gold in the Olympics. And when it came, go time, and he got to Olympics, he choked, and he got the silver medal. So still pretty good, but in his eyes, he was like, why didn't I get the gold? I trained so hard. I practiced more hours than anybody else. What was wrong? What did I do wrong? And that's a question that a lot of students ask themselves too. And he went to go ask other Olympic rifle shooters, the gold medalist rifle shooter, and other gold medalists. And what they said was they trained in their mind more than he did. They visualized more than he did. And this guy was about getting results. He's not woo-woo. I hate the word manifesting because it implies that there's some kind of thing that's like out of your control. And it's like out of thin air, when it's all about getting your mental game really strong. And so what he does now is he's like a high-level Olympic athlete coach. He coaches like golf players. He coaches Olympics. He coaches doctors, lawyers, performers, anybody who has trouble with choking. And he had that same issue. So the thing you need to do is read this book, take the advice. That's what I did. I don't recommend anything to my students that I haven't done myself. So everything that is in the book that I've done. And yeah, it's to get your mental game right. And it's to hone your focus so you don't choke. And what he recommends is to visualize yourself not only taking the exam. So this is what I tell to my students: visualize yourself taking the exam, but more importantly, visualize yourself studying for the exam. Visualize yourself, okay, I'm going to wake up in the morning. I'm going to go grab a cup of coffee. I'm going to brush my teeth. Then I'm going to sit down on the computer, and I would imagine the screen and the questions in my mind that are occurring. And I would imagine myself in first person, which is the screen. And I would imagine myself in third person, looking at myself, looking at the computer. So this will make it more easy for you to study, because the more time you spend studying, the more practice problems that you do, the better results that you get. It's all about getting results. If you haven't tried, if you're stuck and you haven't tried anything and nothing's worked, if you've tried everything and nothing's worked, try this out. You have nothing to lose. And it's about getting results. I wouldn't recommend this if I really, truly didn't believe it works. So you got to write, I tell my students, write affirmations. We go through a whole little affirmation thing, and visualize, meditate so you don't choke. And treat this like a competition. Treat yourself like an Olympic athlete competing and training for a sport. And the sport is the DAT. The Olympic athlete that runs more is going to do better than the Olympic athlete that doesn't. And obviously people have differing levels of talent, but for the most part, the more you practice, the more you get in those repetitions, the better off you are than the other student, right? This is a competition. There's people trying to get that top score. There are people that are trying to get your spot in that dental school, right? And you have to think about it that way in your personal statement as well. Use strong language, use language that is compelling, and don't talk down about yourself. In the interview, you have to practice those interview questions. Visualize yourself taking that interview. Tell yourself that you are a student in that university because you have the same values that they do. And that would be good for you to, to kind of compel you to increase your performance. So if you guys have any more questions, go ahead and leave them down below.